Prey Game Review by Marcus Blake and Alex Moore. Okay, so I'm going to start out by saying this about the game. In terms of it being scary, I know people are going to debate me on this, but I actually think it's scarier than Resident Evil. And here's my reasoning why, and why it also makes for a great game. The fact that you've got these shape-shifting aliens that are always at your feet, that you can't get turned around in time, that you never know where they're at, and the music has that same effect that the Jaws movie did. It just makes it very scary as you're traveling around this space station. And that's what drew me into this game. Like, I was ready to just zip through it, gather my materials, get to the next stage, and then I find myself having to take it slow because of stuff like that. And immediately I was like, okay, this is not like Halo where you're just going to start out shooting aliens. You got to take your time with this game, and it is awesome. But so far, I am impressed with Prey. Great game. It's Bethesda has done a fabulous job with it. So, what about you?
Well, I always keep an eye on the game makers, and Bethesda's one that I've especially enjoyed for many years between Elder Scrolls and
right.
Fallout. But they continue to add to their legacy with a game like this because, sure. as I was mentioning just a little bit ago, it's a little bit more linear in terms of the story. There's not as many side quests. There's not as much. You can't get into as much trouble in terms of getting off course. It is easier
right.
to kind of stay on track. And one of the things that I've heard people complain about with games like from the Elder Scrolls series is that they find it too easy to get off track and stay on course. Well, I think with this game, it is easier to stay on course. There's not as much customization involved, and I think that works in favor of those who just want to get into the game.
Sure.
And going back to the music that you said, I think it absolutely is one of the strengths of the game because it is subtle, but it does kind of get your heart rate going up, even if you're in a place that's not littered with enemies. And the thing about it is the music lingers on and on and on after you've already cleared the room, and so you don't know if there's somebody still around, if there's another one of those, what did you call them?
The little aliens.
Right.
And they're like cockroaches, so even if they're not attacking you, they just scatter, and you really don't know what to do. Do you keep going and finding the materials that you need to find? The space station really isn't that big. I don't think that there is, compared to other games where there's such a huge quest, there really isn't. It's the fact that there are so many different things you can do to get to one point, so many choices you can make. And one of the things that I've noticed that, again, adds to the brilliance of the game is you might have to go back to, 3 or 4 checkpoints before and redo something, like if you didn't have enough ammo. And there was a part that I got stuck at that I literally couldn't defeat the Phantom to watch the video about what had happened, because I had wasted all my ammo before. And now I'm scrambling around trying to go back and find a refabricator to make more stuff to be able to get past this point. And then it gets me thinking that, well, if I go back and I change what I've done 3 or 4 checkpoints before, maybe it's a little bit easier to get past this, and it doesn't take as long.
Right. And the problem I ran into wasn't so much with the fabricator in terms of trying to create more ammo and such, but the strategy of, when you get, I forget what they're called, but they help you get upgrades to where you level up and you can add to your skills and so forth, and you kind of collect them throughout the game. You have to really be careful about which upgrades you're going to use, because they start to become expensive in terms of how many, let's just call them tokens, that you can use in order to upgrade it. Then you find yourself saying, man, I wish I had upgraded this and not that, because I could really use that right now. You just don't know what you're going to need, and according to your style of gameplay and so forth, so you kind of have to figure that out.
Well, and that's the biggest strategy, is trying to figure out what you're going to need at any moment. It's easy, it's logical to think that you're going to need more weapons, but then again, not really. Because there's so many things that you're having to discover from, reading emails and, logging on, getting the certain key cards to get to certain points. It just makes it for not quite so boring, a very, very interesting game. And I see a lot of replay value. I do. But I also see that
all the short stuff.
I just see that there is a lot to. We're just talking. There's just a lot of different choices that you're going to have to make, and a lot of different choices that you can make to get to a certain point. So there's not one particular way of doing it. And from a storytelling standpoint, that is absolutely fantastic.
And I think kind of going back again about what you were saying about being the kind of type of scary it is, and it is different from say something like Resident Evil 7, where it's. I think when you go back to the original Resident Evil 7, it was more about stuff jumping out at you, but it's become a bit more psychological over the years. With this game, it is jump scares, but what makes it, I think, hold up, especially if you replay the game, is like you were saying, you don't know when these copycats, there's another name for them in the game, but the aliens, you don't know where they're going to jump out. It is kind of random, and it could conceivably change each time you play it. And how are you going to remember exactly where you saw it before when you play it again?
You do get the great little clues, with the music, that Jaws effect, which is awesome. But what I find myself doing is not so much focusing on what really happened, but trying to discover as much as I can and get to certain labs and gather certain materials, to get out. Because the more that you gather, the more that you're going to start finding out of the story. And I do like the little videos where it's like the external blog, external. Well, I shouldn't say external, but the little personal blogs of the scientists about it, what had happened and stuff, and it just. It's a really great game. I'm impressed with it. Again, getting back, this isn't a first-person shooter where you're just shooting everybody down to get to the next level or anything. Now, you really do have to explore and make and really think about your choices, especially with the things that you're making and what you're gathering. To get out of there. But I mean, in terms of how big the space station is, again, it's not really that big. It's just there's a lot to do and a lot to discover, and I like that you get to travel outside. So I mean, for a RPG, for exploration, to really dive into a game and it's not hard. This has been one of the best games of the year. I'm not saying it's as good as Horizon Zero Dawn, but I think it is definitely up there. I think it has a lot of great value. I like the idea that you are on a space station where things have gone wrong, and it kind of reminds me of like the Alien movies.
Yeah, and the timing of this is funny because we've just had Alien Covenant, and now we have Prey kind of around the same time. I think there had to be some strategy in that with the release, but it doesn't blow me away in terms of how it looks. I mean, the graphics are really good, of course. Bethesda always has great graphics. And it does have a bit of a unique look compared to some of the other Bethesda titles. They did go kind of a different direction.
Sure.
Not just with the type of game, but also with just the look of it and everything else. And I think that was a good idea because they want to give each game its own look. And assuming there'll be follow-ups to this kind of game, it will kind of have its own kind of style.
We also have to mention that, in terms of the story, you are dealing with an alternate history where Kennedy didn't die, that, we've colonized the moon, and there's a lot more that we're discovering out in space that is turning against us.
And historical fiction continues to be a big draw, not just in film, but now in gaming as well, where stories are more interesting, and we have sort of a parallel universe that we can look at and see what might have happened had things gone a little differently.
In terms of this game being worth $60 to buy, I would say yes. If you really like, role-playing games and being able to explore, and you're not gonna, like an Elder Scrolls game, get sidetracked with all these quests, unless you want that. Out of a lot of the games that have come out that are like, this is one that I think if you're going to spend $60 and really dive into a game and spend a lot of time, it's worth it.
Sure.
So, do I think it's absolutely perfect? No, not at all. I'm only going to give it an 8 for the simple fact of again, because it's a little bit shorter, because it's not completely wide open in the space station while there's a lot to do, it's not all encompassing like other games from Bethesda that we have seen. And in two of my chief complaints is the fact of, if you are going to fight and you're going to try to figure out how to get all the aliens, if you're going to have to rely on guns, like it's easy to collect shotgun shells but not get a shotgun. Okay, there's got to be more to being able to use just a wrench to be able to do that. And it seems like that you're a little bit limited on the weapons that you can fabricate to create that may or may not. I mean, the glue gun, the glue canisters and all that, and the foam are great.
What about the plastic dart bow, which I thought was kind of a funny little. I haven't even tried to use it, but
no, but the fact that you're gathering those materials because you
Yes.
think it's going to do something, and I'm like, do I get to add?
this weapon doesn't actually hurt anything. It just distracts them.
Do I get to fabricate poison to put on the tips? I don't know. But no, I mean, I don't think this is an absolute just perfect game and blowing me completely away like some of the games that we have seen so far. But is it a good game? Would I spend $60 on it? Yes. And that's the reason that I give it a good 8 out of 10 in rating this game.
I'm actually willing to go a little bit higher and give it a 9, which the only other game I've given a 9 is Horizon. And to me, they're both worth the 9 for slightly different reasons. I think with Horizon, it was just a marvelous story, and you connect with the main character, and it plays a lot like Zelda, and so the gameplay just feels.
But do you feel like you connect to these characters as much?
Not necessarily, but I don't necessarily see that as a huge drawback. To me, I feel like this is a little bit more straightforward and almost like old school when you think about just being more of a straightforward game, where the story may not be as important as the gameplay. And as a PlayStation guy, I tend to prefer good stories, but when you're going through so many games a year now, you start to see the value in playing games where the story maybe isn't quite as big and the gameplay is a little bit more important.
Well,
and the gameplay is that good to me. So.
And I completely understand that. For a replay value, if I go back to it again at some point, I may think a little bit different. But right now, I got to give it a good solid 8. But I think if we were to round up and everything, I think an 8.5, 9 is good enough, and I could definitely at least give it that as a great game and worth playing. Also, it should be noted too that until they had the patch, you shouldn't have gotten the PC version, but should strictly rely on the console version. And with fixes and all that, like I said, the gameplay is great. It's gorgeous, at 1080p, and that's what makes it a great game. So, gamers, yes, Prey is worth the buy, and you should go and get it.
So between us, it's 8.5. We'll just put it that way.
Well, but we would round up to a 9. I would be a little bit. I'm usually the more generous one on our reviews anyway, so I'll do that. But again, I think how we rate it, it does come down to would you buy it at $60?
Sure.
And yes, that's the important thing.